The word echoed through the quiet grocery store, sharp and final. Declined. For the second time. The cashier, a kid who wore his boredom like a uniform, said it louder this time. As if yelling might magically make the money appear. For Alistair Finch, a man who could buy the entire grocery chain without a second thought, the $7.43 for milk, bread, and cheese had become an impossible price. But it wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about the crushing silence that followed. You could feel the judgment from everyone else in line. The tired mom's sigh that was just a little too loud. The businessman in the expensive suit tapping his foot, making a show of his impatience. This was a new kind of broke, a poverty of dignity, and Alistair had never felt it before. The silence was a mirror, showing him a man he didn't even recognize, powerless, vulnerable, and completely alone. And that silence was about to be shattered by the smallest voice in the room, a voice that would change his life forever. What would you do if everything you owned suddenly meant nothing? And what if your only hope came from the one person you were taught to overlook? Section 1, The Gilded Cage. Alistair Finch lived 57 floors above the rest of the world. His penthouse wasn't a home, it was more like a modern art museum with a view. Polished marble floors, stark, uncomfortable furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city he practically owned. His entire life was air-conditioned and orderly. Calls were screened, meals were prepared, and his path was cleared by a team of ruthlessly efficient assistants. He was so insulated from the real world, he'd forgotten what a sidewalk felt like or how the air smelled after it rained. He hadn't been inside a grocery store in 20 years. Why would he need to? The world came to him. But today was different. He was on a mission from his estranged daughter, Amelia. On their last phone call, she'd said, her voice dripping with pity, "You don't live in the real world anymore, Dad. Go buy your own milk. See what it feels like." It was a sarcastic jab, but Alistair took it as a challenge. He had something to prove, mostly to himself. And that's how he ended up here, lost in the fluorescent hell of Greenfield Mart. The number of choices was an attack on his senses. A dozen kinds of milk, 50 types of bread. He felt like a deep-sea fish dragged to the surface. He was a master of hostile takeovers, but in an aisle with screaming kids and shopping carts, he was completely out of his element. He clutched the 3 items to his chest, feeling ridiculous in his $1,000 suit. He got in line, his skin crawling with the unfamiliarity of it all, and could feel the eyes on him. He was a creature in a zoo, and the whole world was staring. Section 2, The Fall. At the checkout, things went from uncomfortable to humiliating. Alistair put his items on the conveyor belt, 1 carton of milk, 1 loaf of bread, 1 block of cheese. 7:43, the cashier, Kevin, mumbled without looking up. Alistair pulled out his wallet and handed over his primary platinum card without a second thought. An issue was, quite literally, impossible. Kevin swiped it. A sharp beep. It's declined, he said, a little louder. Alistair felt a flash of irritation. A glitch. That's not possible, he said, his voice colder than he meant it to be. Run it again. Kevin sighed, the sigh of a teenager who'd rather be anywhere else, and swiped it again. Same result. The people in line behind him started to shuffle. Alistair, keeping his cool, pulled out his ace in the hole, the famous black card, a piece of titanium rumored to have no spending limit. He'd used it to charter jets and buy rare art. The idea it wouldn't cover $7 worth of groceries was absurd. Here, he said, sliding the heavy card across the counter. Use this. Kevin's eyebrows shot up. He swiped it. For a half second, there was hope. Then, a louder, more insistent beep. A single, brutal word flashed on the screen in red. Declined. This time, Kevin didn't mumble. He said it loud enough for the whole line to hear. And in that instant, Alistair Finch's world fell apart. The hum of the refrigerators, the squeak of a cartwheel, the pop music overhead, it all vanished into a roaring silence in his ears. Shame washed over him, hot and suffocating. He, Alistair Finch, was standing in a grocery store, unable to pay. He could see the whispers starting, the smirks being hidden behind hands. The businessman behind him was already texting someone about the show. His mind raced for a reason. A security flag? A system failure? It didn't matter. All that mattered was the raw, public humiliation. In that moment, he wasn't a billionaire. He was just a failure who couldn't buy milk. He just wanted to disappear, but he was trapped by a $7 debt and a dozen pairs of judgmental eyes. Section 3, A Small Voice in the Silence. Just as Alistair was about to give up and flee, a little movement caught his eye. A young girl, maybe 7 years old, had been watching him from the back of the line. She had curious brown eyes and 2 neat cornrows that bounced when she moved. She was holding the hand of her mother, a woman in worn-out nurse's scrubs who looked just as tired as everyone else. Her mom sensed the tension and gave her daughter's hand a little tug, trying to pull her away from the drama. But the girl, Maya, didn't budge. She wasn't staring with pity or judgment. She looked like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Then, she did something no one expected. She let go of her mother's hand and walked right up to the counter. Her tiny sneakers squeaked on the floor. "Maya, no," her mother whispered, but it was too late. The little girl stood on her tiptoes to see over the counter. She looked right past the cashier and into Alistair's shocked face. Then, she opened her little fist. Inside was a crumpled $5 bill and a sticky handful of quarters and dimes. "You can have mine, mister," she said, her voice clear and steady. "It's my emergency money, but it looks like you're having an emergency right now." The effect was like a shockwave. The cashier just stared, his mouth hanging open. The impatient businessman stopped tapping his foot, a blush creeping up his neck. The teenagers who'd been snickering went quiet. It was as if this little girl had held up a mirror to everyone else in line, and they hated what they saw. Alistair looked from her earnest face to the small pile of money. A $5 bill and some change. It was nothing, and yet, it was everything. It was the purest act of generosity he'd ever seen. This wasn't charity. It was solidarity. This little girl, who probably had next to nothing, was offering him all she had because she saw someone in trouble. The shame that had been choking him was washed away by an emotion so foreign he could barely recognize it, awe. The walls he'd built around his heart for decades began to crumble. He couldn't speak. All he could do was stare at this little girl, Maya, who had just shown him more humanity than he'd felt in years. Utterly shaken, he finally broke his paralysis. Without a word, he turned, left the groceries, the money, and the stunned shoppers behind, and walked straight out of the store. Section 4, The Search. Back in his silent penthouse, surrounded by priceless art and a glittering city view, Alistair felt nothing but emptiness. The only thing that felt real was the memory of a small hand holding a crumpled $5 bill. He'd faced down corporate raiders and market crashes without flinching, but the simple kindness of a 7-year-old girl had broken him. He had to find her. It wasn't just curiosity, it felt urgent, like he needed to understand how a child could be so compassionate. He called his head of security, a former intelligence officer named Harris. "I need you to find someone," Alistair said, his voice raw. He described the incident at the Greenfield Mart, the time, the checkout lane, the little girl with cornrows, the mother in scrubs. "I don't care what it takes," he said. "Find her." Harris, a man used to tracking spies, was surprised by the request but simply said, "Done, Mr. Finch." The search was quick. Using security footage, they found the girl and her mother. A partial debit card transaction for rice and beans led them to a name, Sarah Johnson, a registered nurse at the city's public hospital. And her daughter, Maya Johnson, age 7. The report Harris delivered painted a picture of a life that was a world away from his. Sarah was a single mom working 12-hour shifts in the underfunded pediatric ward. They lived in a small apartment in a part of town Alistair's driver usually avoided. But one detail in the report hit Alistair like a punch to the gut. Maya had been saving her allowance for weeks. The $5 she had offered him wasn't just emergency money, it was her comic book fund. She was going to buy a new superhero comic that day. She had offered him her dream. The next day, Alistair drove himself to Maya's neighborhood in an ordinary sedan. Dressed in simple slacks and a sweater, he felt completely out of place. The building was even more run down up close. He climbed 3 flights of stairs, his heart pounding. He knocked on apartment 3B. Sarah Johnson opened the door. Her face was tired, but her eyes narrowed with suspicion when she recognized him. "Can I help you?" she asked, blocking the doorway. "Ms. Johnson," Alistair began, his voice surprisingly soft. "I was the man at the grocery store. I wanted to apologize for leaving like that, and to thank your daughter." Just then, Maya peeked out from behind her mom. "It's the sad mister from the store," she said. For the first time in a long time, Alistair broke into a real smile. He crouched down to her level. "Hello, Maya. I'm not sad anymore, and that's because of you." He looked her in the eyes. "Can I ask you something? Why did you offer me your money?" Maya thought about it seriously. "Because your face looked like my mommy's does sometimes," she said. "When she's worried about bills. Mommy says when you see someone hurting, you're supposed to help. It's what superheroes do." The simple honesty of it hit Alistair hard. He slowly stood up, looking at Sarah, whose suspicion had melted into surprised understanding. "Your daughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is incredible. You've raised a truly special person." He knew he couldn't pretend anymore. "Ms. Johnson. Sarah. I have to be honest with you. My cards were declined because of a security glitch. I never use them myself. My name is Alistair Finch. I own Finch Enterprises." Sarah just stared, her eyes wide with disbelief. The name was famous, it was on half the buildings in the city. But Alistair wasn't there to brag. He was there to repay a debt to a little girl who had reminded him how to be human. Section 6, The Reward and Resolution. The shock on Sarah's face slowly turned to confusion. Alistair knew that just handing her cash would be an insult to Maya's gift. This had to mean something. "Sarah," he said gently. "I've learned a little about your work. I know you're a pediatric nurse, and that city public is a tough place to work. My foundation just acquired a private hospital. We need a new head of pediatric nursing, someone who knows what patients really need. The job comes with a director's salary and full benefits. It's yours, if you want it." Sarah was speechless. It was a lifeline she never would have dared to dream of. "And for you, Maya," Alistair said, turning to her. He handed her a small envelope. "This isn't a reward. Think of it as an investment. Inside is a certificate for the Maya Johnson Scholarship Fund. It will pay for your entire tuition to any university in the world. It also comes with a lifetime subscription to every comic book you could ever want." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she took the envelope. But Alistair wasn't done. "One more thing," he said, looking around the worn-down hallway. "My foundation has bought this building. As of today, all rents are cut in half, and next week we're starting a full renovation to make this a safe, beautiful place for all the families here. Think of it as a down payment on a lesson I desperately needed to learn." This wasn't pity, it was gratitude. Alistair Finch looked at Maya, who was now beaming. "Thank you, Maya," he said, with more sincerity than he'd used in years. "You didn't just offer me $7. You gave me back a piece of myself I thought was gone forever." He had walked into that grocery store a rich man. He walked out of this apartment a wealthy one. CTA. If this story reminded you that kindness is the most valuable currency we have, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And let us know in the comments about a time when someone's unexpected kindness made a difference in your day. Your support helps us share more stories that celebrate the best parts of being human. Conclusion. That day in the grocery store changed everything for Alistair Finch. He didn't just change his routine, he changed his reason for being. Inspired by a 7-year-old girl, he completely redesigned his foundation. He created the Maya Initiative, a program that finds and rewards everyday acts of kindness with life-changing support. He finally learned that real wealth isn't about the number in your bank account, but about the connections you make and the good you put out into the world. The story of Alistair and Maya is a powerful reminder that in a world that can feel cold and cynical, one small, selfless act can still change everything, proving that the biggest transformations often start with the simplest gestures.